The night it happened, Red Creek was loud with music and whiskey. Lanterns swung above the saloon doors, casting golden halos over the boardwalk. Laughter spilled into the street along with piano notes that stumbled over themselves inside. Clara Whitmore had only stepped out for air. The noise pressed too close, the cigar smoke too thick. She preferred the quiet edges of town, where the wind carried dust instead of perfume and promises. She had been new in Red Creek then. New enough that men still asked her name twice. New enough that some mistook politeness for invitation. The gambler had been watching her all evening. She'd noticed him in the reflection of the saloon mirror earlier, slick dark hair, polished boots, a grin that lingered too long. He bought drinks for half the room, laughed louder than the rest, and carried himself like a man who believed attention was owed to him. Clara had declined his offer with a simple shake of her head. "No, thank you," she'd said. It should have been enough. Outside, the night air felt cool against her cheeks. She closed her eyes for just a moment, listening to the distant lowing of cattle beyond town and the soft whistle of wind sliding between buildings. Then fingers wrapped around her wrist. "Don't be so serious, darling," the gambler drawled. She turned sharply, trying to pull free. "Let go." But instead of releasing her, he stepped closer, whiskey heavy on his breath. A few men near the hitching post glanced over, not alarmed, just curious. "I just want my good night," he said with a smirk. Before Clara could step back, his hand tightened. His mouth crashed against hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was pressure, force, the scrape of stubble against skin and the taste of someone else's drink. Her hands pushed against his chest, but he only laughed into her mouth as though this were a game. The contact lasted only seconds. It felt much longer. When he finally released her, she stumbled back, breath uneven. The men by the post chuckled. One tipped his hat like it had been a show. "Well now," someone muttered. "Looks like Red Creek made her welcome." Heat flooded Clara's face, not from romance, not from flattery. From humiliation. She didn't cry, not there. She lifted her chin, straightened her gloves, and walked past them without a word. Each step felt heavier than the last, boots echoing against the wooden planks. Behind her, the gambler called out, "You'll thank me someday." But she knew she wouldn't. In her small rented room that night, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the washbasin mirror. Nothing looked different. Her lips weren't bruised, her dress wasn't torn, and yet something felt misplaced. She had imagined her first kiss once, quietly, foolishly. Perhaps beneath cottonwood trees. Perhaps with someone who looked at her like she mattered. She had imagined warmth, choice, a slow leaning in, not laughter, not hands that didn't ask. She touched her lips with trembling fingers, as if trying to understand what had been taken. It wasn't innocence, it was trust. By morning, Clara Whitmore carried herself differently. Her smiles became careful, her distance deliberate. She learned how to step aside before hands could reach her. Learned how to read a man's intentions in the tilt of his hat. Red Creek forgot the moment by the next week. She never did. The sky burned gold behind the corral, the sun dipping low enough to set the dust aglow like drifting sparks. Clara rested her folded arms along the top rail of the fence, watching the horses settle for the evening. Their quiet snorts and the rhythmic thud of hooves against packed earth were steadier company than most people she'd known. Daniel Hayes stood a few feet away, one boot hooked on the bottom rail, hat tipped back. Just enough to reveal thoughtful eyes. He had a way of being present without crowding the air. Even in silence, he felt steady. "You always come out here when it's near sundown," he observed gently. "It's quieter," Clara replied. Less pretending. He studied that answer but didn't press. A breeze tugged at the loose strands of her hair, brushing them across her cheek. She didn't move to fix them. She'd grown used to small discomforts. After a moment, he asked, "You ever been in love, Clara?" It wasn't teasing. It wasn't prying. It was careful. She felt the question land somewhere deep. For a heartbeat, she considered deflecting it with humor. But something about the way he asked, like he was prepared to carry whatever answer came, made her stay. "I've been kissed," she said instead. The words were steady, but they carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Daniel's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not outrage, not curiosity, concern. "That ain't the same thing," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, "it isn't." The memory rose uninvited. The lantern light, the laughter, the grip on her wrist. She kept her eyes on the horizon as she spoke, voice even, almost detached. "It was outside a saloon. A man who didn't much care whether I wanted it or not. Folks thought it was amusing. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. His hands remained loose at his sides, though his posture straightened slightly, like a storm gathering strength far off. I said no, she added softly. He didn't hear it. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of hay between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt respectful. He had no right, Daniel said at last. She gave a small shrug. It was a long time ago. That don't change what it was. His voice held something firm now, not anger that burned wild, but conviction anchored deep. Clara felt it like warmth against cold skin. I don't reckon it matters anymore, she murmured. It was just a kiss. Daniel shook his head slowly. A first one ain't just anything. He stepped a little closer, but not too close. Firsts shape how a person expects the rest to go. She finally looked at him then. Really looked. And what do you expect? She asked. He held her gaze steadily. I expect that if I ever lean in toward a woman, it's because she's leaning too. Not because I'm stronger. Not because I can. Something in her chest shifted. Careful, cautious, but undeniable. He reached for the fence rail beside her, his hand resting there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the narrow space between their fingers. But he didn't touch her. If I ever kiss you, Clara, he said softly, it'll be because you choose it. And if you never do, I'll still respect you the same. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than bold promises ever could. No charm, no pressure, just patience. For the first time since Red Creek, she didn't feel watched. She felt seen. Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, softening the sharp edges of the ranch into something almost dreamlike. The world felt hushed, wrapped in white and waiting. Clara stood at the barn entrance, watching her breath cloud in the cold air before disappearing into the night. Inside, lantern light flickered warmly against wooden beams. The scent of hay and leather drifted outward, familiar and grounding. She could hear the steady brush of Daniel's hand against his horse's coat, the quiet murmur of his voice as he worked. Even the animals seemed calmer around him. For weeks after their conversation by the corral, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He hadn't moved closer without reason. Hadn't tested boundaries. Hadn't turned softness into expectation. If anything, he'd given her more space, as though proving his promise through action rather than words. It unsettled her in the best way. Tonight, she had made a decision. Clara stepped inside, boots crunching softly on scattered straw. Daniel looked up immediately, setting the brush aside. You all right? He asked, concern gentle but quick. I am, she replied. He waited. The lantern light caught in his eyes, turning them warm amber against the winter dark. She felt the old instinct flicker, the urge to retreat, to guard, to let silence speak instead. But fear had already stolen enough from her once. I've been thinking, she began, clasping her gloved hands together to keep them from trembling. About what you said, about firsts. He said nothing, giving her the space to continue. I let one bad moment decide what a kiss meant, she admitted. Decide what closeness meant. I told myself it didn't matter. That it was small. She inhaled slowly, but it wasn't small. Snow tapped lightly against the barn roof. Daniel stepped closer, but carefully, stopping far enough away that she still had room to breathe. No, he said quietly. It wasn't. She met his gaze, steady this time. I don't want that night to be the only thing I remember when I think about being kissed. His expression softened, something almost reverent in the way he looked at her. Clara, he murmured, you don't owe anyone bravery. I know, she swallowed, but I'd like to be brave anyway. The air between them felt charged, not urgent, not rushed, but alive. She took a single step forward. If you're willing, she said softly, I'd like to know what it feels like, when it's right. Daniel didn't move immediately. He searched her face, not for permission alone, but for certainty. When he found it, he closed the remaining distance slowly, as if approaching something precious and fragile. He lifted his hand, stopping just short of her cheek. A question. Clara nodded. His fingers brushed her skin, warm against the winter chill. The touch wasn't possessive. It was steady, reassuring. He tilted his head slightly, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the memory she had carried. No force, no audience, no laughter, just warmth. He kissed her gently at first, barely more than a whisper of contact. She felt the softness of it, the patience. The way he waited for her to respond rather than taking more. When she did lean in, just slightly, he deepened the kiss, slow and unhurried, like a promise unfolding rather than a claim being staked. Her hands found his coat, not to push him away, but to hold on. The world outside the barn faded into falling snow and distant wind. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested lightly against hers, breath mingling in quiet clouds. That, he said softly, is how love is meant to feel. Clara smiled. Not guarded, not careful. Free.